Top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
No spin, no bias, no censorship. I'm Dan Wootton. Tonight, the Boris witch hunt has failed. The kangaroo court convened to destroy his political career was unable to produce a smoking gun, but the embattled PM got a few shots of his own.
Everyone knows that there are some features of this proceeding that are extremely peculiar. People who say that we were partying in lockdown simply do not know what they are talking about.
My verdict on a seismic day in Westminster that still threatens the future of British democracy, coming up in my digest next, before my superstar panel give their view. Tonight, I'm joined by Amanda Plattel, Dominique Samuels and Nigel Nelson. Then, in the clash, I'll ask Annunziata Rees-Mogg, Lord Stephen Greenhalgh and Jerry Hayes whether, after Boris's strong performance in the kangaroo court, they think he intentionally and recklessly misled Parliament, or not. Your important verdict on that too. It was a big day for the activist MSM as their Partygate witch hunt reached its last act, and they couldn't hide their thirst for a bloody finale.
It's beyond surreal. Oh, you couldn't possibly have expected the man in charge of the rules and charged with explaining the rules to actually understand the rules.
So has the British broadcast media exposed its blatant bias against Britain's Brexit, delivering Prime Minister once and for all? That's our big debate later in the Media Buzz. Also coming up tonight, as high-profile Brexiteers like Priti Patel and Liz Truss lead a Tory rebellion that left Rishi Sunak needing a Labour leg up to pass his Northern Ireland deal. Will the PM's soft Brexit tear the party apart? Will Brexit's Spartan chairman of the powerful ERG group of Tory MPs, Mark Francois, speaks out live in the studio. Plus, former Tory Minister Anne Widdecombe has her stay on a monumental day in Westminster. She lends her unmissable analysis, big witty style soon. Plus, as a top American lawyer says there's no exception for royalty after reports Prince Harry could be deported over his drug use, the think tank battling to have his visa details released reveals why it's fighting for transparency.
It is important that no one receives preferential treatment in terms of their immigration application.
Prince Harry's biographer Angela Levin joins me live to react to that extraordinary developing story shortly. And it's been an emotional day here at GB News after our superb colleague and legendary journalist Alistair Stewart announced his retirement. Thanks for the memories, my friend.
Good evening and welcome to the first election debate.
Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Alistair Stewart and I will be with you for the next 3 hours.
We're going to pay tribute to a true titan of British broadcasting later in the show. As ever, a first look at tomorrow's newspaper front pages too, and a brand new Greatest Britain Union Jackass. This is Dan Wootton tonight. Let's go. The best analysis on the Boris Johnson witch hunt you won't get anywhere else in the MSM on the way. But first, Polly Middlehurst.
Dan, thank you, and good evening to you. The top story on GB News tonight. As you've been hearing, Boris Johnson has been telling the Privileges Committee, hand on heart, he did not lie to MPs over Partygate. The former Prime Minister says although he takes full responsibility for the gatherings at Downing Street during lockdown, his statements to the House of Commons were made in good faith. He went on, though, to criticise the committee itself of bias in its investigation, and he singled out the chair, Harriet Harman, for being prejudicial. He insisted he attended parties at Number 10 to motivate staff.
People who say that we were partying in lockdown simply do not know what they are talking about. People who say that that event was a purely social gathering are quite wrong. My purpose there was to thank staff, to motivate them in what had been a very difficult time.
Boris Johnson, well, the current Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has seen off a backbench revolt today by Tory hardliners who are opposed to his Brexit deal with Northern Ireland. 22 Conservative rebels, including Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, voted against the Stormont Brake regulations, the key element of the Windsor framework, which aims to give Stormont a greater say on how EU rules apply to the province. The vote was passed with 515 votes to 29, with Labour and other opposition parties backing it. Now, Scotland's First Minister has today apologised to mothers who were forced to give up their children for adoption in the 50s, 60s and 70s. Nicola Sturgeon condemned the practice, which is estimated to have forced 60,000 women to part with their children.
Mothers who had their babies taken away from them, to the sons and the daughters who were separated from their parents, to the fathers who were denied their rights, and to the families who have lived with the legacy. For the decades of pain that you have suffered, I offer today a sincere, heartfelt and unreserved apology. We are sorry.
Nicola Sturgeon. Now, the RMT union has called off strikes that were due to be held at the end of this month. This comes as discussions continue between the union and the rail delivery group in the long-running dispute over pay, jobs and conditions. Members were due to take industrial action on the 30th of March and the 1st of April. The Prince of Wales has made a surprise visit to Poland to thank UK troops involved in the Ukraine war. Prince William praised the cooperation of British and Polish troops who've been working together to support the people of Ukraine and their freedom. He met with the Polish Defence Minister as well as soldiers to personally thank them for working together. And just one last piece of news. Within the last hour, we've heard the US Federal Reserve has raised its interest rate by 0.25 percentage point. The Bank of England, of course, due to make its next interest rate decision tomorrow. Full coverage right here, GB News. For now, that's it from me. I'll see you in an hour. Back to Dan.
So look, I knew it was going to be bad, but the Privileges Committee kangaroo court attempting to finish off Boris Johnson's political career was even more crooked, biased and corrupt than I thought was possible. Having read 52 pages of careful and considered evidence from the former Prime Minister yesterday, it is blatantly obvious that he neither knowingly or recklessly misled Parliament. That's what the committee was meant to be investigating today, not the horrific and inhumane COVID rules that you know I campaigned against throughout the lockdowns. But the anger that many now feel about the revolting guidance and laws forced upon us in 2020 should not be conflated with an anti-democratic campaign to end the political career of Boris Johnson by the Westminster establishment, because that threatens to undermine British democracy itself. In the rare moments he was allowed, that was a point Boris himself attempted to hammer home.
Everyone knows that there are some features of this proceeding that are extremely peculiar. I have the utmost respect for you, the Chair, but you've said some things about this matter before reading the evidence, which are plainly and wrongly prejudicial. The best and fairest course now would be for the committee to publish all the evidence it has assembled. Despite my repeated requests, the committee has refused to do this. As investigator, prosecutor, judge and jury, it has elected only to publish the evidence which it considers incriminating and not the evidence which I rely on and which answers the charges. That was not a party. I was there to...
I haven't said it was a party, Mr. Johnson.
Well, you did actually earlier on. People who say that we were partying in lockdown simply do not know what they are talking about. I did not wittingly or recklessly mislead Parliament. There's not a shred of evidence to suggest that I did. And I hope that you will exonerate me, and I think you should exonerate me, of any contempt whatever.
I mean, look, they absolutely should. But this Boris-hating committee had made up its mind long before they heard a scrap of evidence. The Labour chairwoman, Harriet Harman, who had already publicly declared her damning verdict against Boris, wants to see him booted from Parliament as the final act in her political career. Now, remember, Boris remains the politician her party's fear has the ability to beat Slippery Summer at the next election. And during 3 hours and 15 minutes of torturous evidence, the committee made clear they only had the public destruction of Boris in mind.
I have to say, if I was accused of law-breaking and I had to give undertakings to the House of Commons, of all places, I would want the advice of a lawyer. It must have been, yes, obvious to you at the time, and even more obvious on reflection afterwards, as this whole thing broke around you, that it was in breach of workplace guidance relating to social distancing.
Would it not have been obvious to you that the event was in breach of the guidance?
Are you not naming these officials who you say were giving you these assurances because you can't remember who they were?
There has been a concerted effort to delegitimise the committee, to call us a kangaroo court. Have you characterised us as a kangaroo court?
If you look at what Sue Gray has to say.
But we're not relying on Sue Gray's evidence, isn't that ironic?
Let me be clear. Even if you despise Boris Johnson and hope he never returns to number 10, this committee must not be allowed to drive him out of office. In an unprecedented move, they have redefined their definitions and thrown out any legal precedents in a bid to claim he recklessly misled Parliament. What on earth does that mean? We're still no clearer after today. And do we really want to exist in a system where Prime Ministers can no longer answer questions in the House of Commons, relying on advice from top officials and public servants without fearing being booted from public life altogether? I've also got to remind you that Boris commissioned the Partygate inquiry himself once he realised he had been misled, and then he corrected the record in Parliament once its findings were released. That report's author, Sue Gray, is now going to become Starmer's chief of staff. You couldn't make this stuff up, folks. The deep state stitch-up of Boris Johnson could actually have deep ramifications for our political system. After today, it seems almost inevitable to me that this committee is determined to find him guilty, despite failing to produce any smoking gun whatsoever. And at that point, it will be up to all Conservative politicians, even you, Rishi Sunak, even you, to do the right thing for the good of British democracy. The stakes could not be higher. To respond now, my superstar panel. Top Daily Mail columnist Amanda Platel, the political commentator Dominique Samuels, and the political editor of the Sunday Mirror, Nigel Nelson. Now, Amanda Platel, on the sofa last week, you said it was going to be a witch hunt, but did you believe it would be as bad as what we saw this afternoon?
Yeah, I expected that. It was pretty ferocious. But I have to say, I thought Boris did brilliantly, and he kept to his narrative, and he kept repeating again and again, I did not, whatever the wording is, you know it, Nigel.
Recklessly or deliberately.
Or calculatingly or hideously do all these things. He set out his case. I like the fact when he got a bit angry. I think that the people who support Boris, and there's still a great number of them, would have thought, job well done, very, very difficult. I thought it was interesting looking at Sir Bernard Jenkins, as he's now known. When I used to work for William Hague, we used to have a cardboard cutout of him in the office. And I have to say it's slightly more animated than he was today. But the thing that really, really bugs me about this is, setting aside whether or not we should have been locked down, you know, that is our history, that's what we've done. Unless you've worked inside government, well, I was in opposition, unless you've worked inside there, you do not understand how hard that job is. You don't just work, you work 24/7. And most of the officers, like the ones that Boris refers to in number 10, they wouldn't pass a kind of safety test. They're rabbit warrens. But that's kind of great because you work really closely together. You have crisis after crisis. You are thrown together. You throw yourselves together to do this work. No one kind of understands that. And what really made me so mad today was, you know, hearing all these people on the radio saying, oh, you know, it was really terrible. I didn't see anyone, you know, I didn't do this, I didn't do that. Well, those people went in and worked. His advisors, supporters, went in and worked the whole way through lockdown at a time when we were paying $70 billion for 1 in 4 people to not work at home on furlough. And the rest, loads of other people just working from home and doing sweet FA, which is Fanny Adams, my mum always said. And so you've got this whole bunch of people who didn't work, who didn't go through, who didn't, you know, they suffered. Of course they suffered. Really, really hard only being able to go out for a walk twice a day.
And not being able to see your dying loved ones.
Oh, come on. Please don't do the dying loved one argument.
Well, it is true, though. There are people that weren't able to see their dying loved ones, their dying parents, because they were terrified within an inch of their life because of people like Boris Johnson. The excuse here is that he didn't knowingly mislead the House. He's acknowledged that he did mislead the House. But what does that actually say about his capabilities of him to understand
Dominic, look,
the guidance that he was setting
here's
for
the thing,
everybody
and
else?
I want to make it very clear again, because you know, because we sat on the sofa together throughout. I regularly, on a daily basis, throughout all of the lockdowns, campaigned against the rules and the regulations that Boris Johnson and the government imposed on us.
That you're
but
saying
this is a completely separate issue.
I don't think it
and
is.
if you care about democracy in this country, you have to be very careful that a group of MPs who call themselves the Privileges Committee and are full of stacked people who work for the establishment effectively, who hate someone like Boris Johnson because he went against the narrative when it came to Brexit, that they have the power to potentially finish his political career against the will of the people. Dominic, when he was elected in an 80-seat majority 3 years ago.
It is so not finished.
It
is so not finished.
And you were
That's naive.
You were talking about one issue, that's Brexit.
But in my opinion,
he failed on that
but this
as well.
sets a precedent,
That's why
though.
we're still talking about Brexit
But this
now.
sets a precedent about witch hunts in Westminster. This was the man voted in.
But this isn't something that's just happened to Boris Johnson. He isn't the victim.
No, it is.
Here.
It is.
This is
They
something
have
that Boris has
changed the
brought
terms of
upon
this inquiry.
himself.
In previous inquiries by the Privileges Committee, they never used this word recklessly. How on earth, Nigel Nelson, do you decide that Boris Johnson acted recklessly? That is subjective. This is a kangaroo court. It is not based up.
It's
not backed up by
First of all, it's not a kangaroo court. It's a parliamentary procedure on an existing committee that is there to carry out
these... They've changed the rules. You must concede they've changed the rules specifically for Boris Johnson because they want his head on a plate.
So the rule change you're talking about is recklessly, right? This could be his lifeline. That's the whole point about this. If you watch the end of the hearing...
didn't prove it, did it?
Well, hang on, no. If you watch the end of the hearing, he was asked by Charles Walker, a Tory MP, whether he would admit to recklessly misleading Parliament as opposed to deliberately. Why that's a lifeline is recklessly would be a lesser charge. So yesterday's evidence that Boris Johnson gave to all of us said there was no evidence that anyone had told him that rules or guidance was being broken. That's what came out of the committee. Also, what came out of the committee and their evidence that was published this morning was that there was no evidence that he was ever told that rules hadn't been broken. So the reckless bit is to go to Parliament and make a statement.
Well, he disputes that, by
without knowing that.
And it could be
he saves his skin because if, say, he gets a 5-day suspension rather than a 10-day one, he carries on as an MP.
Yeah, but he did produce evidence from Jack Doyle, who was one of his chief advisors at the time, making it clear that the guidance had been followed.
What Jack Doyle said was that there was no evidence the guidance hadn't been, but none of the officials or Jack Doyle actually cleared him in the sense of saying, oh, yes, absolutely, you're right, there's no problem with that. They were trying to stop him...
The Boris evidence disputes that.
Well, Boris Johnson admits that he misled the House because he got it wrong. And the question here is...
But he says he got it wrong because he was misinformed by his advisors.
How could he be misinformed when he was at several events? He was pictured there. Now, it might be that he wasn't told emphatically that there were concerns about rule breaking, but I really do question this idea that he didn't know that the rules were being bent.
But it was his workplace that also doubled as a home, obviously. But look, for me, what this actually comes down to is something much more than Partygate, because, you know, I think Partygate is a stitch-up. I've never given a damn about it. But how can we have a parliamentary system that never once brought this scrutiny to Tony Blair, 20 years on after the war in Iraq?
But there was the Chilcot report that dealt with Tony Blair.
Not a parliamentary privileges committee.
But it wasn't a parliamentary...
Well, it was. I'm sorry. Blair lied time and time again about the motivations for going to war. And also, more recently, Matt Hancock, whose absolute reckless lies when it came to care homes probably led to the deaths of thousands and thousands of people.
Whose side do you think Boris Johnson would be on? Matt Hancock, because he had him as his health secretary. So this whole idea that he's some sort of anti-establishment stalwart, I think it really is quite delusional. And in terms of what the punishment will be, he will simply be suspended. It's not like he's going to be thrown in jail.
No, because if he's suspended for more than 10 days, there can be a recall petition, and that would spark a by-election which would finish his political career.
Do you think that a by-election, so would he run in the by-election, or would he just...
He could, he'd be allowed to. He'd be allowed, but
so then people could decide if they want him as an MP. I think his career is over anyway, and the idea that...
you disagree, Amanda Patel? You disagree?
I think I have a little bit more of an understanding of the political process.
And you think...
Of course he's got... This is Nigel...
Well, I mean, to make that
can I actually speak? Would that be kind of nice
for
me be able to have a sentence without you interrupting?
OK, Amanda?
Would that be kind of nice? I was actually speaking to Nigel. Nigel, you think this might have thrown him a lifeline?
Yes, because if
I agree.
If he gets a suspension below the 10 days, it's a rap over the knuckles. What he needs to be is a bit less arrogant, a bit more humility, rap over the knuckles, carry on as an MP.
So that's basically why I said that it wouldn't be a real punishment then. So I don't get what your point is.
I think we have to see, because, of course, if it's 10 days or more, then his political career can be finished off. But we've got lots more to discuss on this. My superstar panel are with me all night. Amanda Patel, Dominique Samuels, Nigel Nelson, thank you so much. But also still to come, royal biographer Angela Levin live in the studio to react to these reports that Prince Harry potentially faces deportation from America after publicly boasting about his drug use. But up next in The Clash, we want your verdict after Boris weathered the witch hunt today. Do you think he intentionally and recklessly misled Parliament? Conservative peer and long-time Boris ally, Lord Stephen Greenhalgh, ex-Tory MP and criminal barrister, he's no fan of Boris, Jerry Hayes, and former Brexit Party MEP Annunciata Rees-Mogg. Join me to debate that straight after the break, but your verdict most important to me. Dan at gbnews.uk. Tweet me using the handle at gbnews. Our poll running there too. Cannot wait for the results. Straight after the break.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel. It's time for The Clash. Now, like the rest of the country, you heard Boris's evidence to the Privileges Committee today. You heard my view in the digest, and this is a key moment of the former PM's forthright defence.
I'm here to say to you, hand on heart, that I did not lie to the House. When those statements were made, they were made in good faith and on the basis of what I honestly knew and believed.
So I'm asking, do you think Boris Johnson intentionally and recklessly misled Parliament? That is, of course, the question being asked by the committee. So what do you think? Email me, Dan at gbnews.uk, tweet me at gbnews. Our poll running there too. But to debate this now, I'm joined by a stellar lineup of political masterminds. The Conservative peer, Lord Stephen Greenhalgh, a long-time ally of Boris Johnson, the ex-Tory MP and criminal barrister Jerry Hayes, and the former Brexit Party MEP Annunciata Rees-Mogg. Great to have you all here. Lord Greenhalgh, the issue here is that the rules have been manipulated, haven't they, by this committee, I believe, to try and finish off Boris Johnson. Where do you think they stand after today?
Well, they haven't got a leg to stand on. We've had 10 months of investigation, hours now of cross-examination. There's not a shred of evidence that Boris knowingly misled the House. At this stage, I think we've got to move on. After all this time, I just don't think there's a case to answer, and he should be exonerated.
Annunciata, do you agree?
I do. I think today all we learnt was that they came in with a view of what Boris was like and what Boris might or might not have done, and they stuck to it. And they asked him repetitive questions, showing that they weren't really interested in understanding what he had done, he thought he'd done, who he'd spoken to, but to confirm their own conclusions.
Jerry Hayes, you strongly disagree.
To Nigel Nelson, who knows this stuff. Firstly, yeah, the rules were manipulated. Recklessness. That is a lifeline for Boris Johnson. As a criminal barrister, I tell you, if I can get a deal with the CPS to say plead to recklessness, I'll get a lesser sentence. Secondly, To attack the committee is attacking Parliament. Attack members of the committee, it's attacking Parliament, because Parliament is sovereign. Parliament is not subject to judicial review. And of course, it's not the government who supports these people, it's the House of Commons who elects these people. So you're attacking the very root of democracy, which you're saying you're trying to protect, when you're actually not. Now, he's getting a fair deal.
No, he's not.
Listened to. Well, you can see. Look, you can. Well, who are you going to appoint? We just have your brother Annunziata. You have Jacob, who, as a great parliamentarian, so he tells us, he's attacking this. What do you call it? Select
Quite
committee.
rightly. Don't bring her brilliant brother into this, who's done stellar work tonight. But look, Lord Greenhalgh, to address that question specifically that Jerry has just made, how on earth can this committee make a determination as to whether Boris recklessly misled Parliament? There's no legal precedent for the use of that word, is there? This hasn't happened before. This is unprecedented.
Well, hang on a minute, Jerry. You're a very, very distinguished barrister. This isn't a court of law. This is Parliament. And I ask the straight question of people who know, very distinguished lawyers and people who look at parliamentary precedent, has anyone ever found to have been guilty of recklessly misleading Parliament in the history of Parliament, the mother of all parliaments? And the answer is resolute no. It doesn't exist as a category of offence. And there's no precedent. It's not in Erskine's. This is something that is cooked up by this committee as something where they might be able to find something, because we don't even know quite what that means. The real thing, and you're a criminal barrister, is you commit the act, that's not enough, that's the actus reus. Did you knowingly commit the act? And after months and hours of questioning, a police investigation, the Sue Great report, there's not a shred of evidence that he knowingly misled the House. So come on, it's time to move on.
That's not the issue. Recklessness speak helps him. That's the whole point.
How does it help him? If you're up for an offence, how do you get convicted of an offence when the offence doesn't exist in parliamentary terms?
Offence. Look, you know Boris as better than most of us do, and he is quite a reckless guy. He sails by the seat of his.
But Jerry, this is the point, though, isn't it?
That is why they have done it. But it only helps Boris if you start from the point of view that he is guilty. That it doesn't help him if he is not guilty. It adds a lesser charge that is easier to find him guilty.
Yeah, and Annunziata, that's what this Privileges Committee have done, though, haven't they? They have determined his guilt before they've heard a shred of evidence. Yeah. We know that the chairwoman, Harriet Harman, actually expressed that view on Twitter. So, Annunziata, I don't trust the motivation of this committee. I believe they do think Boris is guilty, and they're trying to prove it. Annunziata can respond, and then you can come in, Jerry. Let Annunziata respond. Let Annunziata respond, Jerry. Jerry, let Annunziata respond, and then you can come in.
If you believe that the reckless will get him a lighter sentence, it's only a lighter sentence if you start from the point of view that he's guilty. If you think it should have been a fair and open trial, it wasn't necessary. Committee hearing, investigation, yet another investigation where we've already had so many from the Metropolitan Police, from Sue Gray, who have done this job. And a lot of that evidence wasn't even taken into account.
Indeed.
This is not a serious court.
Jerry, let me just put something to you. You're one of the members of the establishment who just have a visceral hatred of Boris Johnson, don't you? This is personal for you.
No, look, I rather like Boris. He's a very companionable individual. What we don't like about Boris, he doesn't have a really good and happy relationship with the truth. For a start, he said, well, no, never mind, let's get back to the committee, because that's really, really important. The committee have given him a lawyer, which we're paying for, David Pannick, Lord Pannick. Never happened before, so that's interesting. Secondly, they consulted a former Lord Justice of Appeal who used to run the court system for fairness. So they've taken advice, so it's going to be fair. And then finally, it's not them, Parliament decides. And the Conservatives have said it's going to be a free vote. Now, it can't get much better than that. You can't say that's a witch hunt. It's democracy. It's parliamentary sovereignty.
Lord Greenhalgh?
It is a witch hunt if you invent a new charge after the event. We do not believe in retrospective law in this country. And this is what they have done.
Lord Greenhalgh, do you want to respond?
Well, look, the reality is that every single shred of evidence that could have got Boris has been given to that committee, unredacted. They've had months and months and months to look at things, and frankly, they've come up with absolutely nothing. It's time to move on. I think the country's sick and tired of all of this.
And Lord Greenhalgh, you are, of course, one of Boris's closest allies. Do you think there's another act to his political career?
Well,
is he still motivated by that?
Well, I think he is. I mean, this is a man with, the Midas touch when it comes to elections. I've described him as the Conservatives' Wilson, someone who will come back again and serve a distinct second term as Prime Minister. He's electoral stardust, and we haven't heard the last of Boris Johnson by any means.
Conservative here. Lord Stephen Greenhalgh, absolutely brilliant to have you alongside the ex-Tory MP, criminal barrister Jerry Hayes, and the former Brexit Party MEP, brilliant political commentator Annunciata Rees-Mogg. But who do you agree with? After his Privileges Committee hearing, do you think Boris Johnson intentionally and recklessly misled Parliament? From Lee on Twitter. After watching the hearing, it's abundantly clear it's an utter farce. The committee have clearly already made up their minds and have no intention of listening to a single word Boris has to say. Steve writes, Boris has had 6 months with his highly paid lawyers to come up with his defence. I don't believe a word he says. And from Betty, I watched the hearing and I saw a man explaining his thinking and actions. These were honestly explained and totally feasible. The committee was woefully prejudiced in their line of questioning, with a strong emphasis on guilty now, prove otherwise. And your verdict is now in. 60% of you say yes, Boris did intentionally and recklessly mislead Parliament. 40% of you say he did not. So a split verdict there. Coming up, after Boris Johnson stood up to the kangaroo court in Westminster today, and as the Stormont frame workers waved through the Commons despite a significant Tory rebellion, former Conservative Minister Anne Widdecombe joins me to talk all things Boris and Brexit. But first, the journalist and author Angela Levin live in the studio to explore reports that the Duke of Delusion, Prince Harry, could be booted out of the States after his foolish public admissions of drug abuse. See you in a moment.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And Widdicombe on the way, but first, a top American lawyer has claimed that Prince Harry's drug-taking confessions could threaten his US visa. Former federal prosecutor Neema Rahmani told the New York Post last night an admission of drug use is usually grounds for inadmissibility. That means Prince Harry's visa should have been denied or revoked because he admitted to using cocaine, mushrooms and other drugs. Now, the Heritage Foundation, a Washington, D.C.-based conservative think tank, is currently locked in a battle with officials who are refusing to publish any details about the Duke's visa application. This is one of the foundation's directors, great friend of the show, Niall Gardner, explaining exclusively why they're fighting for transparency.
The Oversight Project at the Heritage Foundation has submitted a Freedom of Information request to the Biden administration to make public Prince Harry's immigration application. It is vitally important that anyone who applies to the United States receives equal treatment. It is important that no one receives preferential treatment in terms of their immigration application. And a key question here is whether or not Prince Harry's application to the United States received full vetting and scrutiny, especially in light of his widespread drug use, which he admitted to in his memoir, Spare. This is an issue of accountability and transparency, and there should not be, under any circumstances, preferential treatment given to a public figure like Prince Harry. Everyone should be treated equally before the law, and we are asking for the Biden administration to be fully transparent in providing the documentation that has been requested with regard to Prince Harry's immigration application.
And too right. So joining me now, Prince Harry's biographer, Angela Levin. Angela, do you think, given he has very clearly broken US law, that Prince Harry should actually now be deported from the US?
Yes, it's very interesting because when I heard him say what drugs he's taken without feeling uncomfortable in any way, I thought to myself, he's going to be in trouble. Mm-hmm. You know, he might not get back into America again. So somebody, you know, I'm not a lawyer, I don't know these things, but it's quite obvious that America does not like to take people in who take drugs. It's been going on a long time, and he shouldn't get special treatment. I don't know how much special treatment he got when he was taken in, because he's only got a visa for a certain time. But this is more important, and I just don't understand how he could be so naive, Harry, and say what he was taking almost as if it was an accomplishment. I also don't understand why his wife didn't warn him about that. He talks to her about everything he's going to say. She's in charge, as we both know, and didn't say, look, be careful, because if you talk too much about the magic mushrooms and the cocaine and all that, you might be in trouble. Why she left him alone to make his own mind up what he says, I feel quite concerned about. And also the mental health guru who was talking to him should have said beforehand, don't mention all the drugs. Here's a man who's helping him, who's in such a muddle to try and think clearly and improve, and there he is actually making his life extremely difficult. So he said he's killed 25 Afghanistans, which makes his life much more difficult, and that people could be after him, and he needs even more protection. And this one makes it very difficult if he can get back into his country, if he leaves for the coronation. I think that's very significant, and you ought to take that into account.
Because
If
maybe
he
they won't
comes
let him back
over,
in.
maybe they won't let him come back there, and then he'll be really in trouble.
I mean, probably the thing that he's got going in his favour is obviously there's a Democrat administration in the US. Biden, obviously a big supporter of Harry and Meghan. You know, if Trump was
including
back
his
as
wife,
president,
they're friends, Harry and
Indeed.
Biden.
So I'm sure he is getting what they call celebrity justice in the US,
Well, that's not
special
fair.
treatment.
It's not
But
fair.
if there was a Trump administration, he actually might be collared, could be booted. Because, you know, if this was an ordinary citizen who had boasted about drug use in this way, there is no way he would have been allowed to enter the US. I've read lots of stories today of ordinary British folk who have been caught by US customs officials. Sometimes they even go through people's phones just to make sure that there's no talk of drug use. Harry has actually admitted it. He's boasted about breaking the US law.
I think there's one thing, that if you're not caught actually taking drugs or selling drugs, you might not be thrown out.
Well,
But
I
if
actually read the story of one woman who had simply spoken to friends on text messages about taking drugs, no criminal charges whatsoever, and she was booted out of the country by
Yeah, it's a
customs
very
officials.
unfair world, and he shouldn't get away with it. I mean, he's no longer a prince, really, in working capacity. He's had amazing help and being spoilt absolutely from top to bottom. So I don't think he should be given any particular treatment now.
And the thing is, Angela, all of this talk of drug use, it was so obvious that he just thought it was cool. You know, he was very proud of the fact that he'd been at these homes of Hollywood celebrities like Courtney Cox, boasting of taking mushrooms. It's actually, for someone who claims that he's a humanitarian, I mean, I don't believe Prince Harry's a humanitarian for a single second. There's one human being he cares about, and that's himself. But he claims to be a humanitarian. Does he have any understanding of the millions of lives around the world that are destroyed because of the scourge of drugs? The young people who get caught up and used by drug dealers. And it actually makes me sick. These middle-class drug users who have no idea of the consequences of their actions because they think it's cool. They think it's cool to break the law.
Yes, they're frightened not to because all their friends are doing it, so they have to too. But also, I'm sure you read that several mothers have complained about him talking about certain illegal drugs because she said her child took it and actually it killed him. There was a him and a her.
Oh, yeah, because he's also encouraging the use of psychedelics too.
Yes.
For mental health treatment. Well, who's he to make
Well, he shouldn't be.
that
He
pronouncement?
should have been sacked straight away because you can't imagine someone who cannot understand anything about his own problems, hasn't improved, he's got far worse than he did when he was 10 years younger. And you can't let people just take what you're saying and using it in a terribly bad capacity. You have to take some responsibility. He hasn't learnt how to be responsible. He's had everything done for him, and he still can't be responsible for his own life, let alone other people.
No, indeed. And look, one of the reasons I'm so opposed to drugs is because when I have seen people in my own life who become under the influence, you know, it is a one-way path to mental destruction. And I think actually we can look at Harry's life, see how things have unravelled over the past couple of years, and actually think that maybe all of this drug use has been a part of it. You know, but Angela,
Well, he started at 17, and he's obviously still carrying on, and so that must have a bad effect.
Exactly.
On
I
his
think
whole thought process.
I think if Prince Harry were to quit the drugs, actually maybe he would have a happier life. But Angela Levin,
I agree.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we'll speak next week. But coming up, as Sly News lockdown party gal in chief Kay Burley joins the hysterical media feeding frenzy surrounding Boris Johnson's Partygate evidence, does it show just how biased the MSM really are? My superstar panel have their say on this, and we'll see how the front pages are covering the Boris witch hunt after 10. But next, on a big day for both Boris and Brexit, former Tory Minister Anne Whittaker joins me to share her expert opinion. She's live straight after the break.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The first newspapers covering Boris Johnson's Partygate evidence coming up in just a moment. But first, Anne Widdecombe here to react to a monumental day in Westminster. So, Anne, look, I know after this week you're officially no longer a Tory again, but what do you think of this Privileges Committee attempt to, I believe, destroy the political career of Boris Johnson, Anne?
I mean, first of all, it was flawed from the start because so many people on that committee have already expressed opinions about Boris and whether he's a liar or not. And
including the chairwoman.
Including the chairwoman. And WhatsApp messages.
Yeah,
including the chairman, Harriet Harman. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, first of all, I don't think the committee is as sufficiently impartial. Secondly, I cannot get excited, and I think I've said this on this programme before, I cannot get excited about that wretched piece of birthday cake. He was in a room with people that he'd been working with all day, and they sat down round a table as they had been doing all day. And they got out some birthday cake to celebrate Boris's birthday. And interestingly, when I was on a programme earlier today, one in which viewers could respond, a man actually telephoned the programme to say, well, he'd celebrated his retirement during COVID in exactly the same way with people that he'd been working with all the time. It's not as if Boris went out into the highways and byways and asked people to come to the party who might have been bringing in COVID. They were people he was with all day, and if they were going to give each other COVID, they'd already done it.
And don't you think there's also something at stake democratically here? Because why should this committee be able to decide if Boris recklessly misled Parliament? That is not a legal term that I believe, after seeing the hearing today, is going to be possible for them to prove. And the issue is, Anne, if they do recommend a suspension of over 10 days and Parliament votes that through, which they may well, because remember, there's a lot of people in the Conservative Party who want to see Boris Johnson finished off as well, including all the allies of Rishi Sunak, the current Prime Minister, he could face a recall petition. So there's a real consequence
if the suspension is that long. And I agree with you entirely. I mean, this notion, that he intentionally misled Parliament or recklessly misled Parliament or whatever it was, that he misled Parliament, I don't think there's much doubt about. The question is, what was in his mind at the time? And only God and Boris Johnson know that. And I think trying to prove the unprovable, which is to say the intention in his mind, is just not viable. I think this is a nonsense committee doing a nonsense job. And I was quite impressed with Boris's defence today. As he said, these were people he'd been working with, and up and down the country we were being told, if you couldn't work from home, go to work, and if practicable, socially distanced, but if you couldn't socially distance, do something else, etc., etc. Loads of people up and down the country will have had a sandwich or something together and thought nothing of it. They would have thought it was a work event. Contrast that with Keir Starmer, who got away with actually a party.
He was downing beer.
Campaigning with people he hadn't been working with all day. Campaigning. And then he has a party with beer and curry and goodness knows what else. Now that, to my mind, was a much bigger breach than Boris with people, work colleagues, for heaven's sake.
And it's been a very dramatic day in Westminster because, of course, just a few minutes into that Privileges Committee hearing and the bells rung out and Boris and the rest of the committee left to vote on the Stormont break. Now, of course, it was always going to pass, this big part of Sunak's Windsor framework, because we know that the Labour Party are on side. To begin with, Anne, it looked like the rebellion, even though it made up lots of significant big names in the Tory party, including 3 former leaders, Boris himself, Liz Truss and Ian Duncan Smith. It looked like the rebellion wasn't actually that big, less than 30. But when you take abstentions into account as well, Anne, and the numbers have been crunched here, actually the government, Sunak, did rely on Labour votes to pass through the Windsor framework. There's another Tory civil war going on, isn't there, over soft Brexit, Anne?
Well, I'm more concerned about the fact that the Windsor framework has passed, or the Stormont break at any rate has passed. I'm much more concerned about that, because that effectively negates Brexit. We've still got EU control of the United Kingdom. I mean, it effectively negates Brexit. The Stormont break means nothing. It's virtually impossible to be applied. If it is applied, we have to pay compensation to the EU. I mean, the whole thing is beyond belief. And for Rishi Sunak,
and that's why you left the Conservative Party, or I know you'd never rejoined the Conservative Party, but that's why you rejoined Reform UK this week.
Well, I didn't rejoin Reform because I'd never belonged to Reform. I belonged to the Brexit Party.
But they were the Brexit Party, yeah.
When the Brexit Party dissolved, I did not join Reform because I've got issues over proportional representation. But once I saw the Stormont, the Windsor framework and the nonsense about the Stormont break, once I looked at the text and once I looked at what the EU was saying, I knew, I'm going to put this bluntly, that we've all been lied to. I mean, the polite expression is misled, overspun, lied to. And that was enough. And I went to join Reform because I am passionate about preserving the Union. Okay. And I think this threatens the Union. It threatens Northern Ireland's place in
the
UK.
Very powerfully put. Anne Widdecombe will speak next week. Thank you so much. But coming up, the leader of the European Research Group, Mark Francois, here, as we're going to ask if Fishy Rishi's soft Brexit is now unravelling in the wake of that rebellion. The next, after a day of gleeful gloating from the mainstream media over Boris Johnson's appearance in a kangaroo court, have the likes of Kay Burley and Alistair Campbell exposed the true bias Bojo faces from the British press? My superstar panel gets stuck into this one. We're back in just 2 minutes' time.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 10 p.m. I'm Dan Wootton. Tonight, Boris Johnson grappled his smirking Partygate investigators while dodging a knockout blow on a dramatic day in Westminster. But as the MSM vultures circled ahead of his marathon evidence session to the Privileges Committee, has the hysterical media finally proven their shameless bias in the witch hunt against the former PM?
It's beyond surreal. Oh, you couldn't possibly have expected the man in charge of the rules and charged with explaining the rules to actually understand the rules.
My superstar panel are riled and ready to debate that imminently. Tonight, I'm joined by Amanda Platel, Dominic Samuels and Nigel Nelson. One man who knows Boris better than most is free speech champion Toby Young, and his longtime friend turned COVID critic weighs in on Boris's bid to save his career in the kangaroo court. He's uncancelled. Can't wait to hear his verdict later this hour. As high-profile Brexiteers like Boris, Priti Patel and Liz Truss join the Tory revolt against Rishi's Windsor Framework deal, is the PM's soft Brexit betrayal now unravelling? Brexit Spartan and chairman of the powerful ERG group of Tory MPs, Mark Francois, joins me live in the studio shortly. Plus, goodbye to a broadcasting legend, treasured colleague and dear friend.
Good evening and welcome to the first election debate.
Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Alastair Stewart and I will be with you for the next 3 hours.
Our very own GB News megastar Alastair Stewart bows out of broadcasting as Britain's longest-serving TV newsman. Don't miss both those stories coming up in our Media Buzz. Also find out which trio of high-profile politicians have been nominated for tonight's Greatest Britain when I crown the GB alongside Union Jackass. And we'll have the first look at how tomorrow's newspapers are covering Boris's Privileges Committee appearance in just one moment. First, though, Polly Middlehurst.
Dan, thank you, and good evening to you at home. Well, today, Boris Johnson has told the Privileges Committee, hand on heart, he did not lie to MPs over Partygate. The former Prime Minister says although he takes full responsibility for the gatherings in Downing Street during lockdown, his statements to the House of Commons were made in good faith. But he went on to criticise the committee of bias in its investigation, and he singled out the chair, Harriet Harman, of being prejudicial. He insisted he'd attended parties at Number 10 to motivate staff.
People who say that we were partying in lockdown simply do not know what they are talking about. People who say that that event was a purely social gathering are quite wrong. My purpose there was to thank staff, to motivate them in what had been a very difficult time.
Former Prime Minister Boris Johnson speaking there. Well, the current Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has seen off a backbench revolt by Tory hardliners today, opposed to his Brexit deal with Northern Ireland. 22 Conservative rebels, including Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, voted against the so-called Stormont Break regulations, the key element of the Windsor framework aiming to give the Stormont Assembly a greater say on how EU rules are applied in the province. Well, the vote was passed with 515 votes to just 29, with Labour and other opposition parties backing it. Now, Scotland's First Minister has issued an apology today to mothers who were forced to give up their children for adoption during the 1950s, 60s and 70s. Nicola Sturgeon condemned the practice, which is estimated to have forced 60,000 women to part with their children and babies.
Mothers who had their babies taken away from them, to the sons and the daughters who were separated from their parents, to the fathers who were denied their rights, and to the families who have lived with the legacy. For the decades of pain that you have suffered, I offer today a sincere, heartfelt and unreserved apology. We are sorry.
The Prime Minister has released his long-awaited personal tax returns, showing he paid £432,000 in tax in the 2021-22 financial year. Rishi Sunak published his personal tax documents covering the last 4 years, and it follows the commitment he first made during his Tory leadership campaign last summer. The Prince of Wales has made a surprise visit to Poland to thank UK troops involved in the Ukraine war. Prince William praised the cooperation of British and Polish troops who've been working together to support the people of Ukraine and their freedom. He met with the Polish Defence Minister as well as soldiers to personally thank them for working together. And one last piece of news, the US Federal Reserve has tonight raised its interest rate by 0.25 percentage point. The Bank of England here in the UK due to make its next interest rate decision tomorrow. Full coverage right here on GB News. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and on the TuneIn app. You're with GB News. Back now to Dan.
Time for tomorrow's news site now in our Media Buzz. And the first front pages are hot off the press. Obviously, they're all going with Boris. So let's see how they're covering the Metro. Leads on the grilling, claiming the former PM had several bad-tempered exchanges with the 7-strong panel of MPs. They described Bojo as being rattled by their questioning. The Guardian, oh so predictably, claims Boris's answers were flimsy and that today's hearing leaves his career on the brink. They don't say it's finished, though. The Daily Star, look, you've got to laugh. You have to laugh at this, and I will have a little giggle if we can have a look at it. They mock Boris Johnson's performance in front of the Privileges Committee, comparing the former PM to TV character Vicky Pollard from Little Britain. They also compare him to Pinocchio because they claim he blamed everyone but himself over alleged lockdown parties. And The Eye says that Johnson's political future is in jeopardy following clashes with committee MPs, claiming that Boris lost his cool when questioned. My superstar panel, back with me now, top Daily Mail columnist Amanda Patel, the political commentator Dominique Samuels and political editor of the Sunday Mirror, Nigel Nelson. Now, just as I've been predicting for months, the Privileges Committee farce proved to be a witch hunt against the last British Prime Minister elected by the people.
Jack Doyle did not say at the time that he briefed me about the December the 18th event that he had doubts about whether the guidance was followed.
He did have doubts. Can I just
ask... Sorry. Where's your evidence for that?
But of course, it's not just fellow MPs wanting to finish Boris off. He was the man who got Brexit done, saw off Jeremy Corbyn and won an 80-seat landslide majority, all while the establishment cheerleaders and the MSM got it wrong every single time. And believe me, They hate him for it. They despise him for exposing their misjudgment, bias and superb ability to continually prove themselves out of touch with everyday Brits. And that's what Partygate has all been about, a media stitch-up enabled by Rishi Sunak, Sue Gray, Keir Starmer and a gang of establishment globalists who set out to eliminate the man who terrorised and exposed their integrity. And even today, so many examples of the untrustworthy MSM being unable to contain their excitement at potentially seeing Boris fall on his sword once and for all.
Ladies, good morning. I'm so looking forward to this.
It's beyond surreal. Oh, you couldn't possibly have expected the man in charge of the rules and charged with explaining the rules to actually understand the rules.
Why on earth would he do so?
Because he's
I worked
entitled to
closely
he
with
thinks he
him
can
for
get away with it.
Beth, this is box office today that we're building up to.
How could the Prime Minister know that what was going on in every office? So
Well,
he
because
asked
he
him
was
if-
there.
No,
He was
but that's
literally-
not
he
true.
was at Lee
You
Kane's
know that's
leaving
not-
do.
No, you know that's not true.
I don't want to talk about this idiot today. I don't ever want to talk about him again.
But it goes beyond just that outright bias. Hysterical champagne socialist Alistair Campbell proved conspiracy theorist today with this vulgar tweet saying he didn't believe that Boris nearly died of COVID during the pandemic, which is rich coming from a man whose political spinning duped us into an invasion of Iraq that killed millions. So, Amanda, has most of the MSM proven today that they're discredited when it comes to covering Boris because their bias is just so ingrained?
Are you serious that Alistair Campbell tweeted that?
Mm-hmm. Yes, he did.
I happen to know from someone who was actually treating him that he almost died.
Yeah, so basically...
Why would you...
So a woman called Barbara Chambers tweeted saying, does anyone actually believe that Johnson nearly died of COVID?
Oh, Lord.
And Alistair Campbell responded saying no.
Oh, but...
What a creep. What a scumbag.
It's just horrible. It's just horrible. What's interesting about tomorrow's papers, the ones we've seen so far, although, of course, the best one, the Daily Mail, is not
still to come,
is that they're almost a repeat of what they said this morning. His career's on the brink. They're so angry that he didn't do something today.
They wanted a knockout blow, they didn't get it?
Yep, that's exactly what they wanted. They wanted to see him humiliated, defeated, and for his career to be over. And exemplified in... I had to write this down, crikey. This is on LBC tonight. This is Max Hastings, the biographer, esteemed Conservative. He said Boris isn't dead yet, and he'd only be happy when he's buried at a crossroad, dead with a stake in his heart. James O'Brien looked like he'd taken like 6 Viagra this morning. He was just kind of over the spectrum. And then every time you saw, with the BBC coverage, because I was flipping through it all, every time they used a picture of Boris in the corner, it was always a really horrible picture of him. And you could see him looking quite good in the actual
He was
committee.
well presented today.
And these horrible pictures of him, and that's like gambling advertising, subliminal, putting up horrible pictures of people all the time.
Absolutely. And Dominique, what did you think of our rivals over at Sly News? Literally salivating at this, you know, I'm so excited about this, Kay Burley said. This is box office for us. Because in reality, they have been part of this. I found it particularly ironic, those two women leading the charge, given they were both suspended for breaking the COVID regulations that they had always believed the government needed to force on all of us.
See, this is the difficult thing for me, because as someone that obviously isn't a fan of Boris, if people haven't already guessed, it is pretty frustrating for me and people like me who are really angry still at Boris to see the very same people that were championing these rules, propagating the fear, only to then break the rules themselves, like Beth Rigby and Kay Burley, to then be waxing lyrical as if they're suddenly the moral arbiters when it comes to Boris, because in reality they are hypocrites. And this is why there is such little faith in the mainstream media at the moment, on either side of the political spectrum, because it seems that anything that is pumped out has a really disingenuous agenda behind it. So am I personally convinced by the likes of James O'Brien, who blocked me, or Beth Rigby or Kay Burley? No, and I think it's quite frankly laughable that they're trying to sort of purport that they knew what Boris did was wrong when they broke the rules as well.
Because, Nigel Nelson, you do have to admit this has been a media campaign. They have loved this. You've all got together to pound day after day after day after day Partygate, and it was always to get to this point, wasn't it? First you wanted him gone as Prime Minister, then you wanted to finish off his political career forever.
I don't think it's just Partygate, and it's certainly not just the media that were doing it. Tory MPs did it too. You've got to remember all the various things that happened with Boris. It wasn't just Partygate that brought it down. It was the fact he didn't act quickly enough on Chris Pincher. It was the fact he tried to protect his friend Owen Paterson. And also from a Tory...
crimes of the century, Nigel.
Maybe not, but these are all adding up. Look, Boris is he's great fun, he's a great speaker, he's a great writer, great campaigner, lousy Prime Minister.
Well, he was voted in, though, Amanda. That's the reality.
Because he's a great campaigner.
And what people are most, like the MSM, are most upset about this, there was not a knockout blow today. And the strategy from Boris supporters is we'll go through to the next election, lose... Rishi resigns, Boris comes in. And I did prophesise a week before that overstuffed little haggis was going to go, and she went the next day. So
could you be talking about Amanda?
My prophecies are not to be disregarded.
Now, look, from the sublime to the ridiculous, Winnie the Pooh fans in Hong Kong and Macau may be a fairly niche group, but they'll be very disappointed tonight with a new Winnie the Pooh horror movie being blocked in the Chinese Special Administrative Reasons for apparently offending, wait for it, Chinese President Xi Jinping. So here's what they're going to be missing.
You're the first person I ever shown this place to.
And why am I so special?
Because soon we'll be Christopher and Mary Robin.
What was that?
OK, so why the blanket ban? Well, it's because China's totalitarian President Xi has been shutting down any reference to A.A. Milne's timeless Winnie the Pooh character since memes comparing the two, and there they are side by side, began going viral back in 2013. The cheeky comparisons have previously caused the 2018 Christopher Robin film to be banned across China. And the provoked president is clearly still desperate to suppress any mention of the fictional character on his watch. I wish I could tell you I was making that up, but it's actually true. And my goodness, on a serious note, I feel for the folk in Hong Kong. You know, it used to be one of a country like us, you know, a British territory. Now they can't even go and see bloody Winnie the Pooh at the movies. Couldn't make it up. Amanda Patel, Dominic Samuels, Nigel Nelson, do stand by, because coming up with big beast Brexiteers, including Boris and Priti Patel, joining the ERG rebellion against the Windsor Framework, is it time to admit Rishi Sunak cannot be trusted with Brexit? My superstar panel are going to wade into that battle very soon. But next, I'm joined in the studio by Marc Francois, leader of the aforementioned European research group, who bravely led that revolt against the framework. He's going to explain why Rishi's soft Brexit plan is a bad move for Parliament and the people. Live with me in this studio straight after the break.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Dubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway...
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back. Now, Rishi Sunak's hopes of pushing through a soft Brexit could come at the cost of party unity after he faced a significant backbench rebellion to his Windsor Framework Bill. The 22 true Brexiteers who voted against his much maligned changes to the Northern Ireland Protocol were led by Tory heavyweights, including Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, Jacob Rees-Mogg, Priti Patel, Ian Duncan-Smith, John Redwood and Andrea Jenkins. And ERG number crunching has revealed that the PM's Northern Ireland deal would have actually failed without the support of the Ramona opposition because of 48 Conservative abstentions that wiped out Sunak's parliamentary majority. Meanwhile, former chair of the ERG, Steve Baker, was kicked out of their WhatsApp group for criticising Boris over his opposition as the Tory party descended into open civil war. Watch.
Today's measures are better, of course, than the protocol that Boris Johnson put in place, a protocol which he spoke about, and those things he said turned out not to be accurate. So, you know, he's got a choice. He can be remembered for the great acts of statecraft that he achieved, or he can risk looking like a pound-shop Nigel Farage, and I hope he chooses to be remembered as a statesman.
Mark Francois, a very big day, lots to pick up on, but can you respond first to those comments from Steve Baker?
Well, look, Steve is an old friend of mine, so I'm not going to get into any kind of personal spat with Steve.
That seemed quite personal, though, didn't it?
Well, as I say, I'm not going to get into a row with Steve. All I will say is that whatever you think of Boris Johnson, I don't think he's ever been a pound shop anything. But Stephen is a friend of mine, so...
Who made the decision to boot him from the WhatsApp group? Was that you or someone else?
Absolutely not, no. I think there was a bit of a mix-up over the admin of some of these WhatsApp groups. No, of course I didn't.
Farage said earlier on his GB News show that when it comes to Steve Baker, a ministerial role has seen him throw away his Brexiteer morals. Is that unfair?
No. I'm sorry, I think that is unfair. Look, Nigel Farage is as entitled to his opinion as anyone else. I've always gotten fairly well with Nigel, even when we've disagreed. Let me be clear, Steve Baker is one of my oldest friends in politics. He and I work very closely together in opposing Theresa May's ill-fated withdrawal agreement. Steve is still a friend of mine after today. We just happen to be in two different lobbies, but that can happen in politics.
So look, let's talk about the rebellion, because it actually is much larger than what it seemed at first glance, right?
Yes, so, you know, I'm a former senior whip, and there's an old thing, which is at the end of the day, go through the division list, because often the division lists, when you analyse them, tell a story. So what happened today? The government won, but they were always going to win. That was hardly a surprise, because the Labour Party had... Well, Keir Starmer offered to back it before he even knew what it was. Yeah. So that tells you quite a lot about, you know, Keir Starmer remains a Remainer and always will, in my view. So, 22 Conservative MPs voted against today, and I can come on to explain why in a moment. 48 other Tory MPs abstained. So 70 Conservative members of Parliament didn't back the SI on the stormont break in the division lobbies. That's a pretty big number.
Isaac Levido, who is, of course, not someone that the public know, but a bigwig when it comes to electoral strategy.
Absolutely.
Recently said that the only way that the Conservative Party can win the next election is if there's unity. Now, even though I completely agree with this rebellion, I think the people who rebelled are the honourable Brexiteers. That's my personal opinion. You cannot deny, Mark, that this has sparked a new civil war in your party. Look at who rebelled. I mean, you've got 3 former leaders, IDS, Liz Truss and Boris Johnson. This is a new Brexit civil war, is it not?
No, forgive me, Dan. I think civil war's a bit strong. What happened today was there was a vote in the House of Commons on a statutory instrument about whether or not to implement the Stormont break. And 70 Tory MPs didn't vote for that. Compared to some of the events of the last few years, that is not civil war. That's not even a skirmish. But what I think it is important is why didn't those MPs support the break? We're always limited for time in TV interviews, but very quickly, the problem with the break is it was billed to us and many others as a veto.
It was oversold.
It completely was. Why?
By Sunak.
Well, look, very quickly.
But it was, wasn't it? Well, it was Sunak who sold it, and he oversold it.
Well, I think some of the people around him were mainly responsible for the overselling. To use a medieval phrase, I think the king was badly advised.
OK, well, look, let's have a look at what he's said tonight about the vote, and I'll get you to respond.
Sure.
There was incredibly strong support for the Windsor framework, not just from my own party, but across Parliament. It passed very solidly with Conservative votes, and that's because it is a good deal. It is a good deal for the people, for families, for businesses in Northern Ireland. The Windsor framework restores the balance of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. It secures Northern Ireland's place in our union. It restores sovereignty, and for all those reasons, I'm pleased that it commanded such strong support.
So, Mark, let's be very frank about where Sunak stands when it comes to the ERG. He says you're irrelevant now. His people are briefing to the newspapers over the weekend that the ERG doesn't matter, that he doesn't give a damn that you're not backing this bill because he's going to force it through with the moderates in his party. And tonight, he makes it pretty clear that he isn't worried about the rebellion.
So I don't want to sound like I'm splitting hairs. It's not a bill. It was a statutory instrument. The government could have gone for a bill, a Windsor framework bill, in order to bring these things in via primary legislation.
Of course, but the Stormont break is indicative of who would have voted for or against.
Well, they've chosen to do it via a variety of statutory instruments. One thing that your viewers might like to know is today was the first one. There could be up to a dozen more. So we could be going through this on multiple occasions.
But how do you feel about what his people are saying about the ERG? You're irrelevant, he says. Now, I don't believe that for a single second. I think the ERG have a great heritage, and without the ERG, we wouldn't have the Brexit that we have today. But Sunak and his people think you no longer matter, that you're on the fringes of the Conservative Party.
Point one, I haven't heard the Prime Minister say that. I've been in politics long enough to say, people are briefing on behalf of X.
But you must have read the stories over the weekend, though.
Yes, but I've been reading... We've been being told we're irrelevant for years. If we're that irrelevant, what am I doing on your show now?
Well, I don't think you're irrelevant for a single second.
Well, thank you very much, and hopefully your viewers don't either.
And clearly Boris Johnson and Liz Truss don't either.
And not IDS or Jacob Rees-Mogg or Andrea Jenkins or all these other people, or John Redwood or Peter Bone and all these other people that you... So
the ERG fights on?
I think the ERG will continue, in a sense. Let me put it like this. Our job is to hold the government's feet to the fire on Europe-related issues. If you like, our job is to keep them honest. Now, they might see it slightly differently from that. But what happened today was 70 Conservative MPs did not support this desire for the Stormont break. I could go through all the...
so the death of the ERG is greatly exaggerated.
I think that's probably fair to say.
I just want to very quickly show you a little bit of Boris at the Privileges Committee today. Have a look at this.
Genuinely did not know what the outcome would be and was deeply shocked when fines were issued, not least since I had been told on a couple of occasions at least by Sue Gray that she did not think the threshold of criminality had been reached.
Now, Mark Francois, for a long time, you were a real ally of Boris Johnson. You turned on him right near the end of his premiership. How did you feel about his performance today?
Well, I'm not being coy. I didn't see it because I was rather up to my neck in all of this stuff.
Is this a witch hunt, a Privileges Committee witch hunt against the Prime Minister?
No, I wouldn't use that phrase. But, you know, Boris gave... I didn't see it, but the reports that I've heard is that he gave a fairly feisty defence, which is completely characteristic of him as a man. So...
Do you think he deserves to be suspended from Parliament?
Well, hang on, we don't know what the Privilege Committee... I think we're slightly jumping the gun there. We don't know what the Privilege Committee are going to conclude.
OK, in that case, do you think he intentionally or recklessly misled the House?
I don't think that he recklessly misled the House of Commons, but I'm not sitting on the privileges. So forgive me, Dan, but there is a process.
So you want to see the process play out?
I want to see the process play out. I want to see what the committee conclude. I want to see what their recommended sanction is, if any, and then we'll all have to decide whether or not to vote in it. But I think it would be jumping the gun to pronounce on that until the committee have had a chance to finish their work.
Mark Francois, Chairman of the ERG, thank you so much. Great to have you here tonight, Mark.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
But coming up in Uncancelled, on the day that we just saw Boris facing Westminster's Kangaroo Court, and, of course, the day he voted against Rishi Sunak's divisive Windsor framework, I'm joined by one of Bojo's oldest friends and fiercest lockdown critics, the social commentator Toby Young, for his surprise verdict. But next, in the media buzz, with several Tory heavyweights joining the rebellion against that framework today, could this mark the beginning of the end of Fishy Rishi's anti-democratic premiership? Well, tonight's Superstar panel are going to thrash that one out straight after this short break.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen. Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Let's return to tomorrow's news tonight now in our Media Buzz. More front pages in, and the Daily Telegraph leads with Boris Johnson dismissing Partygate allegations as complete nonsense and hints that he could refuse to accept the inquiry's verdict if it finds he misled MPs. So they say Johnson was besieged but defiant. The Daily Express leads with Boris Johnson's hand-on-heart pledge that he did not lie to the Commons whilst accepting full responsibility for what took place on his watch as PM. Different story for The Sun, though. They've actually gone with Wills, the freedom fighter, as the Prince of Wales today went on a secret personal mission to join British troops in Poland close to the Ukraine border. And look, I've got to show you this one myself because it's just come in, the Daily Mail, and that's our very own Amanda Platel on the front page there alongside Boris Johnson and Harriet Harman. And Amanda, you have been sent on a blind date with a man who reads The Guardian. Was that horrible? How many marks did you give him?
I did, when that was the only thing I knew about him, was that he was age-appropriate and read The Guardian.
Age-appropriate? What does that mean? In his 20s, knowing you. And Amanda Platel is here tonight alongside Dominic Samuels and Nigel Nelson. I'm just joking. 30s for Amanda. She's happy with blokes in her 30s. Now, Rishi Sunak's practically useless Windsor framework successfully passed the first stage of voting today. But after needing a leg up from Labour Ramona MPs, the unelected PM's authority has been dealt a severe blow. A 22-strong Tory rebellion, including former party leaders Boris Johnson, Liz Truss and Ian Duncan-Smith, put pay to Sunak's efforts to unite Conservative MPs behind his deal, and the fact he needed opposition help to pass it has done nothing to quell accusations that he's made his party indistinguishable from Labour, even on issues as monumental as Brexit. A point emphatically made by former Tory minister and my brilliant colleague, Jacob Rees-Mogg.
The government will win the vote comfortably because the Labour Party is on side, and that's very interesting because the Labour Party has always been weak on Brexit, has never wanted a proper Brexit. Keir Starmer always wanted a second referendum, did everything he could to stop it. So once you see the Labour Party supporting it, you have to wonder if it's as good as it's cracked up to be.
And it's double trouble for Sunak after Britain's Brexit delivering PM burst back into the spotlight and onto the political comeback trail today.
I was the Prime Minister of the UK. I was trying to run the country during a pandemic. I could not drop what I was doing, get up and go and institute a personal investigation into what sounded like a Daily Mirror try-on about an event that was now almost a year old.
I still believe it was a Daily Mirror trial. That's genuinely how I feel about Partygate. What you would say, it was a very good day to bury bad news, and Fishy Rishi certainly thought so, because on top of all of this, the PM has tactically chosen today to deliver on his failed leadership campaign's promise to publish his UK tax affairs. His records proved what we already knew. The bloke's stinking rich, paying more than £1 million in tax on earnings of £4.7 million over the past 3 years. Nothing wrong with that, in my mind, but a very odd day to release the news nonetheless. So, with Rishi facing a Tory rebellion over his ineffective Brexit deal and Boris bursting back onto the spotlight, some people, Amanda, are actually saying today could be the beginning of a Boris Johnson comeback.
Well, you and I both like that, but, you know, he's been left intact. You know, he's survived today's grilling. He lives to fight another day. We have to wait to see what happens with his whether he gets suspended or anything.
Because this Brexit rebellion was significant, though, wasn't it? When you
It was,
look at the
because-
names who rebelled, it's not the numbers, it's the fact that it's Priti Patel, it's IDS, it's Truss, it's Johnson,
And
they're big beasts.
They're all people that Rishi screwed. So basically, you've got not just a Boris camp there, but you've got a revenge camp. And, you know, Rishi's going to the... I mean, his polls got slightly better. I think it's now about 10 below in the best polls.
Depending on which polls
you look at. But this is a really big defeat for him because it was only a few weeks ago and everyone was saying, oh, my God, Rishi's a magician, you know, he's such an intellectual. He found the solution to Northern Ireland. Like hell he did. They're still controlled by EU borders, by EU laws. It doesn't matter how you finesse it and how you sneak the rules in like that. He's never been a Brexiteer, and that's one of the reasons that people won't forgive him for it.
Nigel, he oversold the Windsor framework, didn't he? Well, he oversold it.
The whole point about it, it's a fudge, but it's a slightly more tasty fudge than the protocol that Boris Johnson came up with.
Yeah.
So
Boris's point was obviously always that it would be able to be renegotiated from a position of strength.
Well, I mean, the EU said no, and in fact, that in fairness to Rishi Sunak, he was able to get a negotiation. So now medicines and sausages can move from mainland Britain to Northern Ireland, which they couldn't before. They have the same VAT rate, which they didn't have before. You're absolutely right. Amanda's right. They're still controlled by some EU rules.
I don't like it at all. I don't like it at all. But Dominique, is your view that actually this is time to just put the Brexit debate to rest now?
Yeah, I think we have to sprinkle a bit of reality here because Boris's NI protocol was a failure. And even Liz
he
Truss,
always said it was going to be
But even Liz
renegotiated.
Truss, when she was Foreign Secretary, acknowledged that it wasn't in keeping with the Good Friday Agreement and needed to be negotiated. That's why during her short tenure as Prime Minister, she faced the same issues. In Northern Ireland, unionists overwhelmingly support the Windsor Framework. That's just
But
a
not
fact.
the DUP.
Those that are against it, 3 times more people are for it than against it. I'm starting to get concerned now that there are certain people that I believe are career politicians utilising Brexit to drag this thing out when there are far more important things actually going on. We've got our borders being invaded. We were told that Brexit would be the answer to all of our problems in regards to immigration. That's not happened.
Well,
the cost of living is through the roof.
It could be if we had the
But
balls to
the
leave
point is, Dan,
ECHR.
there are bigger issues to be focusing on, and the facts are this wasn't a
So
premiership.
you would have voted for the deal today?
I would, because I think it's an answer to an issue that's being dragged out. You know, the Stormont break, it provides a solution that Boris Johnson couldn't muster, and 280 Conservative MPs voted for it. It wasn't this massive rebellion. Think back to Theresa May 2019, the backstop. That was the biggest rebellion of that political era. I mean, it's just... incomparable.
Dominic Samuels, Amanda Patel, Nigel Nelson do stand by. But look, it's actually been a really emotional day here at GB News after we learned of the retirement of our superb colleague, the legendary journalist and broadcaster Alastair Stewart. After being thrown under the bus by ITV's woke mob after a historic nearly half a century run, including presenting Britain's first ever leadership debate while at ITN, Alastair joined GB News before our launch 2 years ago. He hosted his final episode of Alastair Stewart and Friends last weekend, but will continue to work with GB News as a contributor and commentator on major news events such as the King's coronation. Alastair, who is 71 now, praised GB News for, quote, liberating him as a journalist and described his career as the best job in the world. He's looking forward to spending more time with his family, animals and charities dear to his heart, and, well, he deserves to bow out after this exemplary career.
And finally, the 10pence in your pocket is getting smaller. The Bank of England, which will save millions in production costs, claim it's what the public wants. Not everyone thinks it's a change for the better, to coin a phrase.
Good evening and welcome to the first election debate. Over the past 50 years, there have been numerous attempts to get the leaders of the 3 biggest political parties to debate with each other during an election. Tonight, history in the making.
Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Alastair Stewart and I will be with you for the next 3 hours. Joining me are old friends and new, but mostly, I hope, you.
25 minutes to 7, and Buckingham Palace has indeed confirmed
in the last few moments that Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II has died.
And that's news at 10. From Carol and from me, a very good night to you.
At the end of an historic moment in television and political history, a very good night to you.
Until then, a very good afternoon to you, and indeed, have a lovely week. Bye-bye for now.
Alistair Stewart, OBE, you go down as Britain's longest-serving newsreader and a legend of this business. Thank you for being a friend to me and to so many young colleagues here at GB News. You poured your heart and soul into the launch of this channel. It was really tough here a couple of years ago, and we couldn't have done any of this without you. We're going to miss you very, very much. Now, coming up, after a rotten day being grilled by Westminster's shameless kangaroo court, Boris Johnson's luck may be about to turn as I crown tonight's greatest Briton and union jackass. But next, in Uncanceled, founder and director of the Free Speech Union and close friend of Boris, Toby Young, joins me to back Bojo, bash Rishi's bottled Brexit and probe the latest on vaccine injury payouts. You don't want to miss this. Toby's here right after the break.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel. Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Thank you for staying up with us. Greatest Britain Union Jackass on the way, but time first for Uncanceled. And this is where Britain's top commentators speak out on controversial issues without the fear of the cancel culture sweeping the rest of the media. Now, Boris Johnson's allies told the media this week that the Partygate Privileges Committee was a kangaroo court that won't decide his fate fairly. Johnson refused to say whether he agreed with those comments when pressed by the panel today.
There has been a concerted effort to delegitimise the committee, to call us a kangaroo court. Have you characterised us as a kangaroo court? As a parliamentarian, do you regret that colleagues of ours, who are also parliamentarians, have called the Privileges Committee a kangaroo court?
There should be no attempt to bully any colleague in any matter whatever.
Or is that a yes or a no?
Yes. But you regret that they...
Sorry, I'm not...
Because I regret it.
But I think the people will judge for themselves on the basis of the evidence that you have produced on the fairness of this committee.
Absolutely. If you find him guilty, you are a kangaroo court. Look, one man who knows Boris better than most is his old friend turned Fest critic Toby Young, who went to Oxford with the former PM. Free speech champion, Toby, was a loyal Boris backer until he led the country into crippling lockdowns during COVID, clashing horns with his pal as one of the strongest opponents of draconian pandemic restrictions. So, Toby, is the great irony of this Partygate farce the fact that it proves Boris's lockdown rules were actually a complete joke in the first place?
Yes, he wouldn't be in this pickle if he hadn't imposed these absolutely absurd rules in the first place, in which he himself, as did many people, including me, found it very difficult to stick to. And one of the frustrating things about all the hoopla today surrounding this Privileges Committee show trial is that it's so trivial. They're preoccupied with these trivial details of exactly what Boris knew and when, who said what to whom, and when did they say it, when they really should be debating whether it was the right decision to lock down in the first place, and all the mistakes that were made following that decision. I think it was the most disastrous, catastrophic policy possibly ever, certainly in the post-war period.
Certainly in modern history.
Parliament should be debating. It shouldn't be wasting
absolutely,
their time.
and they should be. They should be, but they're not. So when it comes to the actual Privileges Committee, do you think that they at all got a smoking gun in their evidence today that would mean Boris Johnson could potentially be suspended from Parliament and then face a recall petition? Is there anything close to evidence proving that he recklessly misled Parliament, as they seem to want to claim?
No. If they had a smoking gun, I think they would have produced it by now. They would have produced it this afternoon. There was no killer blow delivered. He wasn't knocked out. He defended himself robustly. He came out fighting. And but I think that the outcome of this trial has been predetermined. Dan, I'm sure you think the same thing. You know, the chairman of the committee is Harriet Harman, a long-standing enemy of Boris's. The investigation was conducted by Sue Gray, who is now Keir Starmer's chief of staff, and she won't say when she and Keir Starmer began talking about that. It could have been during the actual investigation into Partygate. I think that the way it's going to pan out is they're going to decide, well, there's no smoking gun. We can't prove that Boris intentionally misled Parliament. I think they'll give him the benefit of the doubt on that question, but they will find him guilty, I think, of being reckless. And they'll find him guilty of being reckless because he didn't correct himself. He didn't come back and clarify his original statement when he supposedly learned that it
exactly. I agree with you. The establishment fix on this is in. But look, Toby, there's another really important story today. I do want to get to it, actually, because it's been completely overlooked given all of the other news. But it's a very important issue to us here at GB News, given that we have been campaigning for the victims of the vax for a very, very long time against huge pushback, as we know. But in a question in PMQs today by Sir Jeremy Wright about the vaccine damage payment scheme, Sunak finally admitted on the record in the Houses of Commons that there is a big issue with the scheme. Watch this.
My constituent Jamie Scott spent 4 weeks in a coma and remains seriously disabled as a result of a COVID vaccination. The current limit on compensation is £120,000, even for very serious and lifelong injury, and anyone who is disabled by less than 60% gets nothing at all. That cannot be right. Will my right honourable friend look urgently at changing it?
We are taking steps to reform vaccine damage payment schemes by modernising the operations and providing more timely outcomes. But of course, I'll be happy to talk to the honourable gentleman further about it.
I mean, Toby, look, people should have been speaking about this in the media months or even years ago, but this felt like a very significant moment to me today. The vaccine damage finally being taken seriously in the Houses of Commons.
Absolutely. I think a really significant moment. I mean, and particularly following the attempt last week by Andrew Bridgen to talk to the Chamber about vaccine injuries, and the Chamber emptied. It got very little coverage in the mainstream media. He was completely ignored, blanked. It was as though he hadn't been speaking at all. So I think it's fantastic that Rishi Sunak has now acknowledged that vaccine harms is a significant issue. It is something we should be debating. The compensation that the vaccine injured are receiving is nothing like good enough. One thing that Rishi said in the course of this exchange was that there's nothing to prevent Jeremy Wright's constituent from bringing a case against, in his case, AstraZeneca. But actually, in 2020, the government indemnified the big pharma companies producing the mRNA vaccines from being sued. I mean, you still can do it, but your chances of succeeding because of the indemnification granted by the government are extremely slim. So the government really does have to start paying people like Jeremy Wright's constituents much more significant damages for the harms they've suffered from taking the vaccine.
Indeed. And look, we have been on this story for many, many months now, many years now. We'll stay on it. But I did want to mention it with you tonight. Toby, yeah, so great to have you here. Thank you so much. We'll speak very soon. But it's time now to reveal today's greatest Britain and Union jackass. And my superstar panel return. Amanda Patel, your nominee for Greatest Britain, please.
It has to be Boris Johnson for seeing off Harriet Harperson and her kangaroo court. As Skippy would kind of go, that's when something's gone really well. Skippy was a kangaroo.
Dominique Samuels, your nominee.
Mine is Andrew Bridgen MP, which is really apt based upon what you've just discussed. But I want to thank him for speaking up for the vaccine injured in Parliament, despite the political establishment and many in the Conservative Party actually ignoring that issue.
Well, yeah, not to mention big tech, because YouTube, of course, initially censored his speech. They took it down altogether, and it was only the outcry over it that actually saw them reinstated on their platform. Yep. Nigel Nelson, your nominee, please.
Yeah, my greatest Brit is Harriet Harman, who kept her cool today as she had bile poured all over her.
Well, look, today's greatest Britain is obviously Boris Johnson. He's dealing with a very serious Westminster witch hunt, and they didn't land a serious blow today, and I think his political comeback remains possible. Union jackass time. Amanda Patel, your nominee.
It's got to be that snake, Dominic Cummings, who slithered out from under a rock again today, hurling abuse at his old boss, Boris. I suggest he takes a one-way trip to Barnum Castle.
He's already done that, hasn't he? Dominique Samuels, your nominee, please.
Well, mine is actually going to have to be the Conservative Party as a whole, because this country is falling apart and we're focusing on things that I believe just don't matter. And it's time to wake up, really, and smell the coffee.
And Nigel Nelson, your nominee.
It's squirming Boris Johnson for not admitting that misleading Parliament, if not deliberate, might have been reckless.
But he wasn't reckless in any way, and he's proven that today.
No, he hasn't proven it, but he certainly says it. He hasn't admitted anything. But if he admitted recklessness, he might well get off.
You've upset Amanda now. Amanda, you haven't just swallowed... you haven't just swallowed a fly, have you? Do you know, poor Christine Hamilton, who was in that seat last night, actually swallowed a fly live on air.
I was just so upset by what Nigel said. It's choking me up.
You've driven her to tears.
First time I've cried on TV.
Well, look, you are obviously in direct conflict. Amanda chooses Boris Johnson as her greatest Britain. Nigel chooses him as his union jackass. But look, I have to say, it's the double win for Amanda tonight. I think Dominic Cummings is the union jackass because he's clearly rewriting history. And as Boris made very clear today, his evidence should not be taken seriously. He is a man with huge animus and motivation to destroy the career of Boris Johnson. And in many cases, he's the only person who has these imaginary conversations that back up the negative narrative about Boris. But Amanda Patel, glad you've recovered. Thank you so much. Dominique Samuels, thank you to you. And Nigel Nelson, thank you so much too. Thank you for your company on what has been a seismic day in Westminster. We'll be back again tomorrow from 9 p.m, covering all of the rest of the repercussions from this Boris witch hunt. Next up, though, Headliners with its irreverent take on tomorrow's newspaper front pages. Good night.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You're with GB News. In a moment, headliners. But first, let's bring you the latest news headlines. And today, Boris Johnson has told the Privileges Committee, hand on heart, he didn't lie to MPs over Partygate. The former Prime Minister says although he takes full responsibility for the gatherings in Downing Street during lockdown, his statements in the Commons were made in good faith. He went on, though, to criticise the Committee of Bias in its investigation and singled out the chair, Harriet Harman, of being prejudicial. He insisted he attended parties at Number 10 to motivate his staff.
People who say that we were partying in lockdown simply do not know what they are talking about. People who say that